Hi, my name's Caty Illingworth and I'm Head of Training and Development for Epic Risk Management. And I'm really pleased to be here today to talk to you about how we retain focus on safer gambling training during the current situation we all find ourselves in of the global pandemic. So I thought we'd start off today by thinking about some of the reasons why that focus may slip during times such as we find ourselves in at the moment. The buzzword around the pandemic is that we find ourselves in unprecedented times. But actually, I liken the situation with regards to training, and specifically safer gambling training, to any kind of crisis situation. When we are in crisis, there are quite arguably immediate impacts for training teams across the world. Anytime there's a circumstance which affects us financially, socially, there are implications on training budgets first and foremost. And a lot of people do see training budgets as providing a nice to have rather than a necessity. And unfortunately for me, working in a training environment for many years, it's one of the things that's first often cut when times are tough. But also there's a lot of other challenges presented by a global pandemic. There have been huge changes for the workforce. And those changes are in a number of respects. There are changes to the number of employees working in offices. There are changes in terms of people working from home, working more flexibly. There's also changes in terms of restructures. Some companies are taking on new people, some companies are losing people. And within that, there's restructuring going on as well. One of the key things for me during this pandemic was a concern that if our clients lost their focus on safer gambling training, what would happen to the end customers that our training is helping? They're at a time of elevated risk for themselves. A lot of people have arguably more disposable income. They've got time away from family, friends, the things that they enjoy and they love. They may be away from the workplace. There's the isolation of the pandemic. A lot of people talk about feeling quite cut off and only communicating via digital means. And sometimes people are escaping into the world of perhaps gambling more than they may have intended to in normal times. But there's also a lot of demand. Those people who are still in the workplace, there's demand on them to keep those customers safe while also dealing with their own anxieties and insecurities about what's going on in the world around them. So we've got two sets of quite anxious people who are quite naturally going to their fight, flight or freeze type responses given the situation that they face, a lot of insecurities. So in these times, it's quite natural that non-essential training is paused. And sometimes, companies will talk about how it's not the time to invest in technology or to think about changing the skills of the workforce because they just need to deal with the emergency situation at hand. So what does this all mean then in terms of the challenges it presents? I think a key thing from a human capital point of view is keeping the workforce engaged. Now, in the UK, we've had people who've been put on furlough and they've been encouraged to take part in training activities still, which is great. But for me, the training solutions that they're engaging with need to have relevance for them to actually feel that they're engaged in the workplace and still the development is still contributing to the great things that they do. There's the logistical issues. So of course now I can't go out to somewhere like Gibraltar or Malta and stand in a training room in front of a team and run a full day's workshop. And there are quite traditional views to overcome that. Despite the fact we've been talking for many years about digital learning, I think the pandemic has served to put that to the top of the agenda, change the priority order. But still people have the mindset that learning, especially around soft skills, interaction, for example, with an at-risk customer, can only really happen in the classroom. So we've got to challenge that mindset. And there's the mental well-being. I've touched on that already, but when we think about our learners in training, people have to be in the right mindset in order to take on information and then to actually bring it to life in the workplace as well. And generally in a time of crisis, people cling to the skills-based training, the technical things, the absolute must-haves. And very often soft skills training is seen as something that we will come back to when times are more normal. People talk about getting back to normal and picking up training at that point. But my fear for safer gambling training is that if that happens, we lose some momentum at a time of elevated risk. And also, it's about navigating through and leading through change. Organisations should want to be involving their workforce in their development despite the current situation. And actually now could be quite an opportune time for people to be developing their skills for the future and also the immediate work that they do. And we know at Epic, we firmly believe that our bespoke, tailored, in some cases accredited and evaluated safe gambling training is really key to a sustainable industry. And as you all know, that is a huge topic at the moment, something that we all really need to keep our eyes very much on and try and avoid some of the distraction of the global pandemic. So why is safer gambling training more important now than ever? So to summarise, there's that elevated risk element. We know that customers are more at risk in a lot of cases and that people who work in the industry could be more exposed to risk themselves as well. I also think it's a really great opportunity for organisations to demonstrate their real commitment to safer gambling and to creating that sustainable industry, because if we think about how does your company, how does your brand respond to a crisis? And if it's to wipe safer gambling training off of the agenda, then that really undermines anything that you later do around safer gambling and your whole ethos around keeping your customers safe. Soft skills is also about future-proofing. If we talk a lot about the different technologies that are coming along to help people with the future world of work, but what the technologies can't do or can't do to the same level as human beings is that soft skills, that interaction, that human element that we all actually really need. And if I think back to all of the development I've had, I've experienced all different types of training methods and technologies, but it's always the human element that adds that why to what I'm learning and really makes the difference. It's also about well-being. We've talked about the well-being of customers, well-being of employees, and if we can put programs to the top of the agenda that help with that at a time of crisis when people have those high anxiety levels, then all the better. I have a few quotes for you. Soft skills are seen as the difference between surviving and thriving. And I think that's, it's very natural that we would go to a position of surviving during a pandemic. But let's think about how we can turn a negative situation into a potential positive and actually use this time to thrive and actually come out head and shoulders high, proud of the great work that we're doing around safer gambling. And Jeff Carr talks about how businesses that adapt successfully to the new normal, I said on the last slide that we're kind of waiting for normality to return, but actually what will be the new normal? And in actual fact, we're probably going to shift more towards digital delivery for that new normal. But he talks as well about how this training needs to continue. It needs to solve problems for people in the moment. I've had the privilege of delivering training over the pandemic. And one of the best bits of feedback I had was from somebody who said to me after a session that they were really grateful that they felt empowered now to go out and make a difference to people. And that for me was just so powerful, that even in negative times, people are driven to make a difference for customers. And being enabled and empowered to do that helped add back into their self-worth and their well-being. And they now feel much more confident in the work they do, but also the place that they hold within the organisation that they work for. So the human element I've touched on, I think this is so important when it comes to digital learning. It's so easy to think about converting everything to e-learning, to moving things to online resources that people can read through at their own pace. We hear a lot about on-demand learning, in the moment, etc. I mean, the pandemic has meant that people now need to feel connected. And if we think about the solutions I've just talked about, do those solutions really help people to feel connected to the people they're having an impact on? So they need to feel connected to other people. They need to feel connected to their work and to the customers that they protect. They need to feel that they're contributing to that business success. And this is why we need to retain that focus. Our business success in this industry all hinges on building that sustainable culture. And therefore, we must absolutely keep safer gambling training at the top of the agenda so people can feel they're adding value. People are anxious because of various different changes going on around them. And if we can contribute to their well-being at times like this, then all the better. And I'm open to be challenged, but I'm yet to see this happen in a purely digital-only sense, unless that human element is incorporated as well. I also think we need to make sure we don't take our eyes off of the future. You know, as I said, I think that actually the pandemic has shifted certain methods up the priority list rather than actually creating new methods. And in the future, we will probably actually hang on to certain elements of the pandemic that have worked for us, which makes me think that we need to consider how we use digital learning in the future and threading that human element in so that we still have that connection, that why as to what people are doing. And as I said, people are driven to make that difference. They need to hear what that impact is. And within EPIC's training, we use lived experience of gambling related harm in our team to add that human element. So people really understand the impact that the great work they're doing has in a positive way. So how have we done it at EPIC? Well, we know that the vast majority of organisations are switching to digital learning. 70 to 80% are looking at digital learning environments. So how do we go about reshaping our training? Well, there have been a number of stages. We needed to think about what people want. So generally, best practice is that people want bite-sized learning. Because we need to fit it in and around our lives now more than ever. We don't have the luxury of a 9-to-5 day at work, but also there's the concentration, there's the fatigue associated with online solutions. A lot of people are zoomed out. But we do want to include video because we need that human element to what we do. And we also curate content. So in terms of tech, we have used a number of different solutions, Adobe Connect and Zoom, Microsoft Teams, to name but a few. But the key things are to make sure it's accessible for people, that there's functionality in there that really gets you as close to the classroom as possible. You know, classroom and face-to-face will always be our priority at EPIC. We don't shy away from that, but what can we do as the next best thing? So, you know, can we recreate whiteboards and breakout groups and polls and discussions and skills practice? And how can we make sure that that is human-centered and human-led? So we've only used technologies where that's a possibility. People want to learn together as well. To go back to the collaboration point, people want to feel that they're discussing, they're learning from other people. If you think about 70-20-10 learning, only 10% of people's learning can really come from a course where it's just input. And actually 20% comes from talking to other people, learning from other people's experiences, and 70% comes from the workplace. So how do we put something out digitally then that solves all of those issues? And then we need to think about the skills of the people involved in delivering these sessions. So it's quite a different discipline actually to working in the classroom, although that does give you some of the basis. So we've considered all of these elements. What we've also decided is that standalone or off-the-shelf content is not the way to go. I think there's been a lot of focus on going out and developing yourself at this time, but generally I'm seeing people reading and digesting input online rather than engaging in courses where it's two-way learning, and actually people doing all sorts of weird and wonderful things for their development that aren't directly related to their work. So for us, it's always key to think about the why. As I say, face-to-face will always be our priority, and the lived experience brings that to the room, but we've worked that into the digital solutions that we offer. They say that necessity is the mother of all invention. I'm not so sure. Simon Sinek talks about how actually, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I think some solutions, digital solutions, can overcomplicate things, make things less accessible for people. So we've kept it as simple as we can. And we don't want extra barriers for people at a time like this. But what it's done is like I said, shifted digital delivery up the agenda. So it's about transforming and adapting, but also, as I mentioned, keeping the future in mind. How can we develop things now that will be a staple of our future? We also see that continuous development, it's an opportune time now to be developing people. Sometimes, in some cases, people have more time to devote to their development, but also for employee engagement, for that well-being, now is a perfect time, actually. And we see this as a way of contributing to the industry. So again, via face-to-face in more normal times, but also digitally, we've given a lot of thought now to how do we create a pipeline of talent in the SG space. Because when done correctly, this type of training can really add to the human capital that you have in your employees. So we've taken a more holistic approach now, and we're starting to build out. We made the first moves towards developing career paths, not just individual training solutions, but holistic programs of activity that help to develop the leaders of the future. And if organizations can engage in digital learning around safer gambling and come out of the other side of this pandemic with people who are ready to lead and excel at safer gambling practice, then how fantastic. What a silver lining from what actually was potentially a very negative situation when it comes to training and development in this space. So at Epic, we've had some conversations around accreditation. We've got an accredited course that we offer, which results in, for example, Institute of Leadership and Management membership for people who complete. And that, again, adds a human element. Yes, it's a digital solution, but it gives them connections to a community of like-minded professionals. It gives them letters after their name, which is a great reward to be able to give people at a time like this. And it also gives them further access to online platforms where there's content which is very much in synergy with the type of things that we talk about in our programs. So it's not just about how do they tick the boxes of what they do currently, but how do they elevate their practice to the next level? And for us, it is going to that level where you are now managing a team or managing a function or leading the way when it comes to safer gambling. So those are some of my thoughts on how we can retain the focus, how companies can, in a time of crisis, take away that anxiety and replace it with well-being for not only their customers, but for their employees. And actually how we can look to attract, develop and retain the safer gambling talent of the future. So I don't see the pandemic actually as negatively as perhaps I did at the beginning. At Epic, we've actually managed to reach through digital means a lot more people in a shorter space of time than we would have done in the old world, if you like. And I only see that as a positive. Now's the time to connect with your employees, with your customers, and using digital solutions to do so.